Hi there, in this video I'm going to be comparing the early prototype characters we made for Sonic R with the versions that ended up in the game to see what changes, if any, we made during development. All the models shown here are the original models being viewed in Softimage, which is the 3D modelling program in which they were originally made. Because of certain restrictions in the tools we used to export these models to the Sega Saturn, some of the textures may seem misapplied, wrong, or missing altogether. Because of this, I'll be focusing on the differences between the polygon models rather than the textures, unless it's pretty obvious what's going on. Let's get started. Sonic. Okay, so the main differences I can see with Sonic here. On the prototype, his nose is much more defined. On this, it's rounded, it's built out as an actual model. And also the toes on his shoes have a few more polygons in them on the prototype. They're kind of flat at the end, whereas they're just spiked on the final. I would imagine we're trying to save polygons on the final, which is why they've been cut down a little bit. But apart from that, that's about all I can see with Sonic. Miles, Tails, Prower. Okay, so like with Sonic, the shoes seem to have a few more polygons in them here. They're a bit more rounded at the toes, and also at the back on the prototype, they're more rounded than on the final. Also, what's pretty noticeable is on the prototype he has whiskers and also kind of a hair at the front of his head there, neither of which made it to the final model. Again, I'm guessing polygon count, and that would also be the same. His tails actually look more polygonal on the final model. They look more rounded on the prototype. So again, there's quite a few changes on that. I'm guessing for polygon count is the reason we went that way, but interesting. Knuckles. Okay, so the most immediately obvious thing about Knuckles, if you ignore the misapplied textures, is that his shoes are, on the prototype, red and kind of orangey yellow, which is more in line with the classic model for Knuckles, whereas in the final, for some reason, they've been changed to white and red. I have no idea why that's happened. Other changes, there's more polygons in the shoes, again, on the prototype, and also on the hair. You can see the hair is more polygonal on the final, and also the hair drops down more on the prototype and sticks out more on the final. Again, I don't know if that's an aesthetic choice or not. And the final thing is that the tail is attached to Knuckles in the prototype, but is actually detached from Knuckles in the final. It's not even attached to his body anymore. There's actually a gap between the polygons. So interesting. I'm guessing it's for polygon count that we went that far, but again, interesting. Quite a number of changes there between Knuckles from prototype to final. Amy Rose. Well, pretty obvious change on this vehicle. You can see that Amy Rose originally had a massive spinning saw blade at the front of her car. We thought at first that she needed some sort of an attack, just like Robotnik had, and the other characters could jump and spin and things like that. So we wanted to give her some sort of benefit from her vehicle, but obviously the spinning saw blade was seen as probably too violent. Can't remember if it was us or Sega that took that out, but obviously it went. But you can imagine her driving around the track, mowing down, cutting down all the other competitors would not be seen as particularly fair, so it was obviously removed for the final game. The other noticeable difference in this vehicle is she has kind of a spoiler at the back of her car. Possibly polygon count is why that was removed. We all have had a budget of polygons for each model to keep it running fast enough on the Sega Saturn, so it could well be a polygon count again that took out that detail, or maybe it was feedback from Sega. I'm not sure. Again, this was a long time ago. Anyway, some pretty obvious differences on the prototype there compared to the final. Dr. Robotnik. Well, the most obvious change on this model in the prototype to final is in the prototype underneath the spaceship there he has this massive bomb with eyes and like a shark's mouth on it, which he would launch at the opponents, whereas in the final it's kind of been refined. It's kind of like more like a low-slung cannon or something like that. Now, I think the reason for this is more of a technical reason than an optimization reason, although it will have been less polygons for sure. And that would have been that to actually launch the bomb would have meant detaching it from the model. And I don't think our engine really supported anything like that at this point on the Sega Saturn. So having the fixed cannon rather than a bomb that had to fire off and then be replaced every time was a simpler solution. The other real difference between the prototype and the final is that there's some yellow lines inside the cockpit on the final version that aren't there in the prototype. Metal Sonic. Well, these two aren't particularly different. The only real changes I could find is there's a jet graphic added to the final version, shooting out the back, and also the chest cavity is smaller on the final. It's kind of a wider hole on the prototype. But apart from that, pretty similar models, I think. Metal knuckles. Again, ignoring the textures that have been misapplied to the prototype, you can see that these models are pretty similar, with the exception of the eye colour on the prototype seems to be green. May have been a problem with the mapping, maybe they started off that way. In the final they're yellow, and also in the final it's very hard to see, but hidden in the hair there is a graphic for the jet coming out of his back to power him, which again won't have had the final texture on it, I wouldn't have thought. But apart from that I couldn't see a lot of differences. Supersonic. Well, with this model I really couldn't see a lot of differences. Maybe you can spot something, but I think these are identical, apart from the textures, which I think are just misapplied. He seems to have 2 buckles on each shoe in the prototype, but I have no idea why that would ever have been the case, so I'm sure it's a misapplied texture. But again, maybe there's some changes I can't see. Eggrobo. So for this model on the prototype you can see that his jetpack was kind of 2 separate engines side by side, whereas on the final one they've been merged into one. Again, this is probably a polygon count thing. It may even have been because we needed to add the jet effect that you can see on the final. So maybe we freed up some polygons by simplifying the jetpack to give us enough polygons to make that effect. And also his shoes are red in the prototype and end up black in the final. Tails doll. Well, apart from the very spookily applied textures, I couldn't find any differences between these two. Maybe you can, but it looks as though the Tails doll just arrived fully formed at our offices. None of our artists even remember making him. So there we go, a quick look at some of the differences between the prototypes and the final in-game models. Did I miss any details? If so, please let me know in the comments, and as usual, if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.